Okay, this is Tamara Sale, and I'm with the ESA Center for Excellence. And I'm really excited to welcome Sarah Yearlig from the PEER program and Michael Haynes from the Lane County ESA program. They're going to talk about an incredibly important subject, which is what does peer support look like in our coordinated specialty care programs? When the concept of coordinated specialty care was introduced in 2014, it didn't include peer support. And so this is really something that we're developing as we go, and it's there's I think almost a unanimous opinion at this point that it's probably one of the most important components, and most coordinated specialty care programs across the country do have peer support, even though there's not a clear model of what it's supposed to look like. If we could go to the next slide real quick. This is part of the National Training and Technical Assistance Center series for the clinical high-risk early psychosis learning community. We have one more webinar coming up in July, which will be focused on trauma. And after that, unfortunately, NTAC is going away. This is the second to the last webinar that NTAC will be offering. And at that point, we are going to be transitioning over to PEPNet and hoping to continue this learning community as well as many other learning opportunities through PEPNet and its colleagues. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Michael and Sarah.
Hi, my name is Michael Haynes. I work support in the ESA program in Lane County. I first got into this work in 2014. Prior to that, I was a participant of the ESA program. ESA is Early Assessment and Support Alliance. I feel really passionate about peer support work just because of my own personal experience and the difference it made for me to be able to connect with someone who had a shared understanding.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Sarah Yearlig, and I'm the Youth Peer Support Specialist at the Portland Identification and Early Referral Program in Portland, Maine. I'm going to abbreviate that as the PIER program. It is known as the PEER program, but just for hopefully keeping things straight, since the acronym sounds the same as the word peer in peer support. I started working at the PIER program in 2019, the beginning of the year, and I got into this work through my own mental health challenges and finding just that it was incredibly helpful to be supported by somebody that had been through similar experiences. I was actually visited by a peer support specialist when I was in the hospital, and that just transformed my experience. So I feel also very passionate about this work, and happy to be with you all here today.
Before we get into the content, we wanted to talk about the current state of the world.
So we just wanted to recognize that the peer movement is grounded in social justice, and there's so much going on in our country and the world right now, and we just want to acknowledge how important it is to think about how these things intersect and how peer support intersects with other movements for social change, and how we want to stand with people that are marginalized. And I feel like I have a lot to learn in this subject, and I don't even know if I just said that the best possible, but I felt like we both felt like we needed to say something before we started talking about our work. And I think Michael had a few more things to say.
Yeah, I also have a lot to learn, but Sarah and I just wanted to say that Black Lives Matter. And now we're going to switch into the objectives of the peer support today. We hope that you all will learn about peer support as practiced in 2 different clinical high-risk first episode programs in Maine and Oregon.
We hope that you will be able to identify strengths and challenges in both models of peer support.
And then we want to engage everyone in a discussion on the different ways peer support can function on an interdisciplinary team.
try that again. I'm going to start us off talking about how peer support is in the state of Maine. So Maine is pretty unusual in that we have actually adopted intentional peer support as a model across the state. I know the training is available throughout the country, but we're kind of unique in having that be the main focus and source of learning and our model. So the training is offered by the Department of Health and Human Services, and it's a free training for anybody with experience that's interested in this work. And we also have a certification process as well that is free in order to maintain SIPs. So this is pretty remarkable, and I feel very lucky to have this kind of support and opportunity. SIPs, Certified Intentional Peer Support Specialists, have roles in many different jobs throughout the state. So they're present in peer-run settings such as peer centers, and they're also on the warm line, which is like an alternative to a crisis line. They're involved in substance use programs, in emergency departments, in behavioral health home programs, which is like a case management program, and assertive community treatment programs, and at the program where I work, the Portland Identification and Early Referral Program. And I'm one of the few youth peer supports in my organization. And youth peer support in general is not very widespread or very cohesive, and that's something we're working on changing and developing more. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a later slide. The Portland Identification and Early Referral Program has been had an important role in early psychosis since the early 2000s. After a few years of being predominantly involved in training, it opened up again in 2015 under the Mental Health Block Grant as a coordinated specialty care program. It's always been a multidisciplinary family-oriented program, but now it's like specifically has the coordinated specialty care under that umbrella. We have fairly large teams in terms of coordinated specialty care programs. From my understanding, we have an employment and education specialist, with a care and case manager. We have 4 therapists, we have a program director, a psychiatrist, and myself, the peer support specialist. I'd like to give a little overview of intentional peer support, and it's hard to do it justice just in one slide, but I'm going to do my best. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, peer support was really born out of the social justice movements of the 1960s and 70s and the deinstitutionalization of state hospitals. That's really the roots of this work. Sherry Mead developed intentional peer support in the early 2000s, so it's a more recent model that's been very influential and I think is really powerful. Sherry Mead is from New England. So the principles of intentional peer support, the first one is from helping to learning together. So this is the idea of instead of having like a helper-helpee kind of relationship that you might find in a traditional provider relationship, the focus is really on learning together. Both people have things to learn and ways to grow in their relationship. The second principle is individual to relationship. So this is another important concept. Instead of focusing on one person's problems or how they can be fixed or what they can learn, really looking at the relationship and what can both people learn out of this, and what room is there to grow for both people, and how can the relationship work for both people. And if it's not working for both people, then it's not working. And then the third principle is from fear to hope and possibility. So this is really important because it's so easy to be afraid when dealing with mental health challenges. I know there was a period of time where I was asking the questions, will I ever get better? Will I ever feel better? Will this ever end? Is this worth it? And that's a really hard place to be in. And I think the role of the peer support in these relationships is to hold on to that hope and that possibility for change and for things to get better. The tasks of IPS, there's 4 tasks, and these are kind of what I think about on the day-to-day basis. So the first task is connection, and without connection, there isn't really a relationship. And I think about connection in terms of validation, curiosity, deep listening. And the second task is worldview. So this is really, this is where language is really key, trying to understand, how do people come to know what they know, what's going on for them with their family, with their history, with their childhood, that's leading them to make sense of their experiences as they are now, and how is that different from how I might make sense of my experiences. The third task is mutuality, and this is where we try to work on reducing like the inherent sort of power dynamic of somebody getting paid in a relationship, in this context, a big age gap. And so this is about transparency, it's about just being honest and trying to give as much of the power to, to the young person in the relationship, whether it's choosing where to go, choosing time of day to meet, all of those sort of decisions that can be mutual. And then the last is moving towards, and so this is, again, just like, where are we going in life? What do we want our life to look like? Those sort of bigger questions. I'd really encourage you, if you aren't familiar with intentional peer support, to check out the website. There's a lot of really great information on there, and some really good videos on YouTube of sharing me practicing intentional peer support. So it's definitely a great resource. So with that overview of intentional peer support, I want to take some time to look at how does that work for us in our early intervention program. I think we're doing things pretty differently than a lot of places in the country in terms of coordinated specialist care early intervention programs. And so I wanted to talk about some key things that we are putting into place in our program. So one, meeting in the community based on a shared interest. So this is a great opportunity for the young person to take some charge, have some of that mutuality, be able to say what they want to do and where. And also being able to be in a place where they're comfortable, where it feels easier to share or talk. And so I'll talk a little bit about some of the places that I meet people in the next slide. And I also think it's important to mention that when I meet people one-on-one, this can be right before they enter the program, throughout their entire time in the program, which can be 1 to 2 years, and even beyond, and I'll talk about a little bit what that can look like in some of the next slides. So there's really opportunity for peer relationship throughout the whole experience and beyond. Something that I really value about this work is being able to talk about my own experiences. And this is something I think carefully about what I share and when I share with people. But I think being in a space where we can be open is so important to breaking down stigma, to building relationships, to connecting, making people feel less alone. And I really value that opportunity in this job. You've probably heard the slogan, "Nothing about us without us," sort of like a classic peer world slogan. And that's also really in keeping with the IPS values. And so in order to really have fidelity to that model, I keep the conversations I have with young people entirely confidential and separate from the rest of the team. And so what people share with me, I don't bring back to the team. I might talk to somebody for outside supervision, which I'll talk about more in a little bit. But really, it stays with me what they share. And I also don't have any background information or clinical information or diagnosis. I don't look at treatment plans. I don't have any of that information about the young person. And I think this really allows for an organic relationship. It allows for a reduced power dynamic. It allows for me to not have any preconceptions and be able to get to know people just in the way that they want to share with me and at the pace that they want. And they can choose to share what they feel comfortable with me. And I don't have any sort of, like I said, preconceptions. I don't have any ideas of what I think this is going to look like when I talk to a given person. And I really appreciate that. I really like that about this position and the way that we're doing this. Again, I mentioned mutual relationships. That comes up a lot. And with adolescents, I think because of that inherent power dynamic with an adult and an adolescent, I think about transparency perhaps as being more accessible or more reasonable sometimes than mutuality. It just sort of makes more sense to think about, like, how can I be as transparent about everything, about what this relationship looks like, about my work, about my role, about what I don't share, that sort of thing. Just because my role is separate from the clinical portion of the team doesn't mean that I can't ever be involved with somebody's treatment in terms of a more clinical conversation. There are times when a young person that I work with would really like me to join a therapy session or a family meeting. And that's a time when I can be there with them because they're in the same room. And I can also do it in a way that feels good to them by having like a conversation beforehand. I can ask them, what are they hoping to get out of that? How can I be helpful? What might that role look like? And lastly, I think one of the most important things about the way we've structured this is having supervision from an intentional peer support trained supervisor that is outside the program. That was a mouthful. And I think that having that support is crucial for me to be able to do my job. I honestly don't think I could do my job without that. It's really important to have support and have somebody to talk to. And because of that structure, I'm able to maintain confidentiality and not have to share with the clinician what's going on, but feel like I'm still able to get guidance around how to navigate, a challenging situation. I can't stress that enough. Here's a little more detail of what a given week might look like for me. We have 2 team meetings that are an hour and a half long on Tuesday and Thursday, and I attend the first half hour. And this is a time where we can do business, we talk about scheduling challenges, if I'm trying to reach somebody, or if a therapist is trying to reach somebody and we're having trouble, we might check in and see if somebody else has talked to the person. There's no content exchange, but there is a little bit of coordinating around scheduling and connecting. We also do a staff check-in once a week where we each go around and we talk about what's going well and what could be better and what from this multifamily group model. And this is a time when we can all share maybe something that's going on in our life, in our personal life, or maybe something at work. It's a time to celebrate and support each other and feel connected. That doesn't have to involve talking about like a young person specifically with details about what's going on for them. And I really value those check-ins. I think they really help to build team cohesion without having to break out of the IPS model. I run a group. I co-lead it with another peer support specialist. And these groups are based on being out in the community and having fun with each other. As you can see this picture, we carved pumpkins this past fall, which is really fun. And we've also done a number of other things. We do have a budget, so all of that is free to young people, and it's all voluntary. But we've definitely had a good turnout. People seem to really like that. I talked about doing one-on-one meetings and how that can start from before entering program and beyond. I typically meet people outside for walks or at coffee shops, but I've also done other things depending on what the person's interested in. I rarely meet people in the office. It's really, it's about finding a place that they're comfortable and about doing something that we're both interested in. We went to an animal shelter one time. That was fun, or a couple times. I'm part of the multifamily group, and we actually have 3 groups running at any given time, and I rotate between all 3 of them. So I get to work with all of the different staff members as well as get to know all of the families. And so this really builds, I think, confidence in each other. I think it builds community, and I think it helps families know who I am without having to be part of like a family session or something. And of course, the young person is there when that's happening, so it's in alignment with that nothing about us without us value. I have a work cell phone, which is really helpful because I can text for scheduling. And you're probably all aware that that's a great way to meet young people, to reach young people. We have professional development that's offered by the state to maintain certification. When I've talked about the outside supervision, that's so crucial. And I also meet with the program manager, and so I can have supervision in 2 different ways, which is really helpful. We run a community education workshop once a month, and that's a time to talk about some psycho ed around psychosis, and also a time for young people and for myself to share personal stories. And I really value this. I think it helps to break down stigma, and I think it helps to educate, and I think it is really empowering for young people that have just graduated or are finishing up the program and want to talk about their experiences to the community. And I help to coach those young people so that they feel ready and supported in that process, and I find that really fun. There's also been a number of projects that I've been able to help with, including redesigning the website and, of course, administrative stuff. And as you can see, there's like a lot of different components to this role. I am full-time, which I think allows for a lot of this to happen. And I have to say, I don't know if people that are attending this webinar are thinking about adding a peer support position to their programs, but I highly recommend creating a position that is this dynamic, because it keeps me feeling valued and invested in. And I think that's really important for growth, for job satisfaction, for happiness, well-being, all of the above. So I definitely find a lot of value in this. Sorry, it's really awkward to switch slides on here, so that's why there's these awkward pauses. Actually, I'm going to take a sip of water too. So some of this I've already touched on, but I wanted to write it out a little bit more for you to read, and I think it's great to, it's important, so I think it bears repeating. I think because we've been able to have my role be separate from clinical conversations, I think we've really been able to stay true to the intentional peer support values. And I think it's really easy, if I were to be part of those conversations, for the peer role to sort of get watered down or feel like it starts to look more like a clinical role. And so I really believe strongly that this is a great way to do this work. I think one of the pieces that maybe I haven't quite touched on is that because when young people enter the mental health system, it can be so scary being hospitalized or having all this treatment, and it starts to be, I think, really easy to just have your story being shared and your information being passed between providers to feel normal and reasonable. And I think part of having my position be separate, I think, is maybe allowing people to question that and to sort of reclaim some of that power, being able to share what they want to, when they want to, and to maybe feel less ambivalent about like who shares their story. So they really can kind of be in charge of their treatment, of their story, of their journey. I think I mentioned before about joining a session with somebody if they had asked me to, and I think it's important to be really careful about how I do that. Like, I like to know, do they want me to just listen? Do they want me to help advocate? Are they interested in me helping them to remember some point they're afraid they're going to forget? Do they just want me there to feel like they have an ally? So it's really helpful to have that conversation beforehand and be really clear about what my role would be in joining that conversation. And I think it's also great to note that while my role is different, it doesn't mean that there isn't possibilities for collaboration. Being part of those meetings can create, the ability to maybe bridge between a provider or to help somebody feel like more integrated into the program. And so while there is a lot of careful separation, it's not as if like there isn't any collaboration or integration. And I hope that I'm being articulate enough about that. Yeah, so I haven't mentioned this next point yet, but I think it's really important. We have an environment at the PIER program where uncomfortable conversations are okay and they're even welcomed. And so if something I say I'm not so sure if it came out right, I can go to the person and check in with them. If somebody thinks maybe they share too much, they can check in with me. And there's it's expected that there's going to be bumps and there's going to be discomfort and awkward moments and people are going to misstep, and like that's just part of the journey, because this is really challenging work. And there's a lot of lines that we're like dancing around and it's complicated. And so having an environment where it's okay to mess up and it's okay to like be uncomfortable is, I think, really crucial for this to work well. And lastly, this sort of ties into that, but just appreciation, being open to feedback, checking in, all of that regular communication. We, prior to being in this pandemic situation, we were all in the same offices. So you could just pop in and check on somebody in between a session and have a conversation about something about the mental health system that's frustrating and connect over that. I haven't really mentioned how all of this looks different given the COVID-19 situation here, which is definitely impacting people a lot and making things a lot harder. And I definitely am feeling the strain of like working remotely and of like supporting people in this time that's like so much more stressful and bringing up all sorts of other challenges. But I am working from home, and we are doing everything via Zoom or phone right now, including our groups. I see there's a couple questions here. I wasn't quite keeping on top of this. The multifamily group model, I only know of the one we use. Perhaps one of my colleagues could respond to that in the chat. We have, I think our census is maybe 40 or so individuals, but maybe somebody else from my program could also respond to that. I don't have the best tabs on numbers. I think that the question is, I should be repeating these questions. The question is one full-time peer support specialist a good ratio for the number of program participants? I think that if our census were to go up, or if everybody were to want to consistently work with me, we would need another peer support specialist. It feels manageable at the moment, but it also would be really nice to have a colleague to talk to in this setting. And thankfully, I have a whole network of peer support specialists in the larger organization that my supervisor, my intentional peer support supervisor, also supervises. And so I have a lot of other people, other colleagues to talk to in that department, but I think having another person on the team would probably be great. I don't know if I missed any other questions here. I think that's it. Let's see. So challenges and opportunities for growth. So some of the challenges I've definitely experienced. So sometimes someone shares something with me that's really hard to hear, or I'm really worried about somebody and I haven't heard back from them, or I'm not sure if something needs to be reported, like is a mandated reporter situation. And it would be really easy for me just to go to the clinical team and, ask for support there. And it's hard to have to put the brakes on that and go to my outside supervisor and ask for support and problem solve there and then figure out what to do. And it's hard to sit with that discomfort of not knowing. But I think that's a really important part of this work. Mutuality with adolescents, I've already talked about that a little bit. It's I don't think it's possible in many ways to be mutual, and that's where transparency and openness comes into play. That dynamic is really hard to know. Sometimes it's hard for me to know how much to share or how to approach a given person. Sometimes I'm worried that I'll scare them away. There's definitely challenges there and a lot of room for growth for me. I'm looking, there's some more questions Do I have to bill for service? No, I didn't mention that. Actually, in Maine, peer support is not a fee for service. It's bundled under these team services. So like the case manager in a case management team with a peer support specialist, they would do the billing, or the clinician at the program I work at would do the billing. And so that gives a lot of flexibility in terms of what we have to report, or how much freedom we're given in not having to document stuff. Opportunities for growth. I mentioned that we have young people that are speaking at these presentations. You know, I think our program, we would all love to see that expand, have even more people that are trained, maybe have a speakers bureau that we draw upon when there's different opportunities and ways that we help support people in moving beyond that and doing even more things. We have families that are interested in, they're starting to mentor new families. And there's just I think a lot of interest and potential movement towards supporting family members as they're coming into the program. We are building on youth peer support trainings as youth peer support services expand in the state, and there will be more professional development opportunities, but that's something that's definitely been lacking up until recently. And lastly, the youth peer support specialist that I run the activity groups with, that does those groups with me, we are starting an Exploring Unique Experiences group, we're calling it, though we might allow people, we will definitely allow people to change that name if there's something else that resonates with them more. But this will be sort of like build upon the Hearing Voices and the Alternatives to Suicides training, be a space where people can talk about what's going on for them with other folks that get it and that have been there. So with that, thank you all for listening, and I'm going to pass it over to Michael to talk about his program and how things are different there. And yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Thank you, Sarah. This is Michael. I first wanted to talk about the Early Assessment and Support Alliance in general and peer support in Oregon. And from here on out, I'm going to refer to Early Assessment and Support Alliance as ESA. So ESA started as a statewide, or ESA began as a program in 5 counties in 2001. It has since extended to being a statewide program, 1 program in each county. Peer support was integrated as a discipline in 2014. Now, with the 29 programs, 12 of those have peer support specialists. Currently, peer support is not in the ESA fidelity, and so that means that there's nothing really governing the practice of peer support in ESA, and that ensured consistency in services across the teams. In Oregon, anyone can apply to start a peer support model as long as you meet kind of some basic standards. And so what that means is that across the state, you see peer support practice in different ways. Peer support trainings cost around $500 for people to attend, and so that can be a barrier for some if the agency they want to work for isn't willing to pay for it for them. I also wanted to talk about kind of what peer support looks like on the team here. So it is team-based, so I work with a number of other providers. We have counselors, prescriber, occupational therapy, vocational and educational support, nurse, and a case manager. I am present in all team meetings, so case review, case consultation, and that allows me opportunities to advocate on behalf of the participant. One example I can think of is that having access to the emergency health or the electronic health record, I was able to see in a chart that folks who were receiving diagnoses of psychosis. These people were in our clinical high-risk program, so they haven't actually had the experience of psychosis. And I was able to bring that concern up with the team to make sure that that didn't continue to happen. There's such a stigma that exists around the diagnosis of psychosis. And if someone doesn't actually have that diagnosis, it shouldn't exist in their chart. We also have a universal note that we use in the chart. What I noticed is that that note automatically uploads someone's legal birth given name. And a problem with that was that for folks who identified as transgender, it uploaded their legal birth given name into the chart and not their name. And I can only imagine how disheartening that would be for that person if they saw their note and saw what they thought was someone that they trusted. I also meet with people in individual appointments and really try to meet folks where they're at. I facilitate and co-facilitate a variety of different groups. Most of those are activity groups. I'm also participating in the multifamily groups and the graduation for our participants once they complete the program. ESA has 3 young adult leadership councils. Those are folks who have either graduated or are part of our program, and I facilitate one of those here in Lane County. So what does peer support look like in practice? One thing that I try to do is just reduce the power imbalance that's experienced between me and the participant. Peer support really started as a grassroots movement, and any kind of formalized role will really change it from what it was and create a power imbalance. Just being a mandatory reporter creates a power imbalance. I met with a person once that we had built a really good relationship, and when I then had to remind them that I was a mandatory reporter, it just completely destroyed the relationship that we had built, and they no longer wanted to meet with me. I really try to share my experience in a way that's going to connect with participants and support them through their experience. And I've, thinking back to when I was in the ESA program, the first time that I was able to meet somebody that said, hey, I understand what that experience is like. It made such a significant impact on me. And I think something like experiencing an episode of psychosis, or even being at risk for experiencing an episode of psychosis, is such an isolating feeling, and I really felt like it was me against the world. And so to have that connection, it just gave me so much more hope. And I found that with folks that I meet with, they say that they even sometimes feel more comfortable meeting with me than other people on the team, just because I have that shared experience. And in that, I found that there was a group that I was facilitating, and just by asking people to share their pronouns, there was a participant who came out as transgender, and they felt so comfortable to do that just simply because I asked, what folks' pronouns were. Another thing that I think is important is to think of peer support as 2 people learning and growing together, not one person providing to another person. And so I really tried to have that mutuality. One thing that's a challenge is that I am the only peer support on the team. And so that really creates limited diversity in peer support that's available to folks. And I know that I'm not able to connect with everyone in the way that would work for them. And some people have chosen not to meet with me just because they didn't feel like they could connect with me. I wanted to talk a little bit about what this quarantine and how that has changed kind of the support during this time. And something that's really isolating for folks, and in an experience that's already isolating itself. And my quarantine experience has been with a puppy, and this is a picture of him. So this is an area where the Young Adult Leadership Council has really come through to try and make ways for participants to connect with each other. We've been doing a hangout with the Young Adult Leadership Council where it's just a phone call, and anybody who wants to join can come and do so. We have tried to find ways to support people in going outside and connecting, a little bit with the world while doing so safely. So we created a plant naming challenge. So it was just a way for people to get outside, take in nature, and be grounded in the moment, and then send us a picture of a plant that they saw and gave it a name. We've also done or are planning to do a virtual open mic over a Skype type platform, just to allow people to practice their hobbies and come together. So a lot of neat things about it. What has been working well is that I really offer, in comparison to the rest of the team, a perspective. And it's created a shift in the way that people talk to each other and talk about participants. And we definitely have also, like Sarah's mentioned, some awkward conversations. And a lot of times I get into this place where I feel really uncomfortable and have a one-on-one conversation with another team member. I feel really fortunate that those conversations are welcomed, and that I feel empowered to have those conversations. I've had situations where I've been supporting somebody in the community at another appointment that they had, and that person, when I was doing that, asked me to go and make copies of a paper for them, this other service provider in the community. And in that moment, it gave me a good opportunity to role model what it looked like to stand up for myself to the participant that I was with. And so it really makes changes with community members, team members, and participants. And like I said earlier, by creating and building these meaningful relationships, it allows participants to feel comfortable in disclosing and sharing information with me that they otherwise might not. I can really meet someone where they're at, whether that's at their home, somewhere in the community, really wherever helps them to feel the most comfortable. I also wanted to touch on how I'm introduced to new individuals. I forgot to do that earlier. And so we have what we call like a meet the team night. And so a participant will come into our office and have an opportunity to meet with each individual team member in a one-on-one basis. So I will talk with them and share with them a brief little elevator speech of what my role looks like. And then they can leave and have the decision to meet with who they want to after that. I also wanted to talk about some challenges and growth opportunities. So there is a lack of support from other peers. When I came into this role in 2014, I was the only peer support on the team, and today I'm still the only peer support on the team. But I am within an organization that has around 20,000 employees in 3 different states in the country. And so that in itself was a really isolating experience. And I really had to create and build this role from the ground. And there have been a number of institutional challenges that have made the role of peer support so much more challenging. You know, we're a progressive behavioral health program operating within a medical model of treatment. And so there are a lot of things that really butt heads with each other. And so we have to figure out how to do the best we can with what we have. You know, another thing that I've had to work really diligently to do is maintain my peer role on the clinical team, because I'm so connected in all the different meetings and with team members. I've really had to make sure that I stay grounded in my role and where it came from. And there isn't peer-specific training that exists. There may be some, but a lot of the training that I've received is for, you know, a clinician in general. Where I see some opportunities for growth is to create an ESA peer support fidelity, or have ESA peer support in the fidelity guidelines, so that there is kind of the same practice across the state. That way there can be a structured statewide support frame, so that even though I'm the only one here in my role on this team, I can reach out to someone on another county and we can connect and have it be, you know, kind of unanimous. And then I'm also trying to find ways to continue to reduce the power imbalance that's experienced. I think at this point, we would like to open it up to any questions that folks might have about the differences in peer support. And yeah, really kind of create a conversation.
Thanks, Michael. That was great. Yeah, we would welcome questions.
So I see a question that says, how is your role different for CHR versus first episode psychosis, clinical high risk? So it's very similar. The one thing I try to be really careful about is the way I connect through shared experience. So I try very hard when I'm meeting with someone that's in a clinical high risk role, that I try really hard not to use the word psychosis and to not, you know, to keep that completely separate from that person, because that's not their experience. And so I try to just adjust the way I approach connecting through shared experience without really using psychosis as a word that I use. Sarah, do you have anything in that realm to share?
Sure, yeah. Because I don't have access to any clinical information, I don't look at people's charts or treatment plans, I actually have no idea if somebody's in my first episode or clinical high risk category. And I don't think I would approach anybody differently, whichever place in their mental health journey they were at. I would still be approaching them with curiosity and with deep listening and with validation. So I also try to move away from clinical terms in all of my conversations with people. So yeah, that also probably wouldn't change between wherever. This is not coming out articulately. Basically, I don't think I would approach people differently, and I also don't know where they're at in their journey until they start sharing more. And I would try and not use clinical words and explore things with like the language of experience and meaning making instead.
Another question was asked, what have you learned from each other in preparing this presentation? I didn't know much about intentional peer support before, so it really kind of opened my eyes into like a completely different experience and how that could be practiced. And you know, I've come away with ways that I want to change the work that I do as well.
I've really enjoyed this process of putting this presentation together with Michael. It's really cool to get to know somebody that's in a totally different state and doing things really differently, and it makes me feel really think about like, why am I doing it the way I'm doing it, and what do I value about that, and what I might want to change. And I think it's really cool to build connections, even when we're doing things really differently. And I definitely have like a list of a couple of things that I want to learn more about. Yeah, so this has been a great process.
I'm sorry, Sarah. So I notice I keep reading out all the questions. I'll let you read the next one.
Okay, yeah.
Wait, looks like it was to me directly.
Okay.
Never mind.
Yeah, you go ahead.
The question was, hey, Michael, how did you advocate for youth voice during clinical meetings with updates shared by all team members about the participants? How did you find a way to speak to their experience when other clinical team members would seem to not understand what the participant was going through? I think that does make sense, Meredy, if I pronounce that correctly. And I'm going to maybe go for the first part of the question first. How did you advocate for youth voice during clinical meetings with updates? And I think, you know, it's really one thing that I have tried to do is just recognize when there, and I try to do the best I can. I'm not always the best at it, but recognize when there are things said about a participant that isn't person first or isn't as friendly, and just bring that up, have that conversation as to, like, you know, how that could be different. You know, and I think in a perfect world, we would want to be able to have the participant present for all meetings so that they can be there and be a part of it. And unfortunately, we're not at a place where we can do that right now. Hopefully that answered your question. Another question is, what is the difference from a peer support and a family partner? Works with one kid, but embrace the whole family. One thing I forgot to mention earlier, I'll let Sarah answer the question, but we also have a family support person on our team as well.
I'm not seeing that question. Could you say it again?
Oh, looks like it was sent to me privately, sorry. What's the difference from a peer support and a family partner?
We don't have a family partner at the moment, though I think there would be a lot of interest in that. My understanding, if we were to have a family partner, but maybe this is a better question for you to answer, Michael, since you do, I think, currently have one, but my understanding would be it would be like a parent that would work with the other parent, like in tandem with the youth peer support working with the other youth. Yeah, Michael, maybe you could speak to that better than I can.
Yeah, so the person on our team is a family therapist and really works to provide psych education to the family. I think what you're asking here, so I know in Oregon we have youth peer support, we have adult peer support, and we also have family peer support. So I think the main difference would be kind of where that person receives their training to provide peer support. So like a youth peer support would work directly with the youth in the program. A family peer support would work directly with the families to use their experience as a family member to connect with that family member. Another question.
Sorry.
You go ahead, Sarah.
It looks like, Melissa, you have that. It looks like that same sort of position that we were just both mentioning. That's really cool. See, the next question. I always let clinicians know that just having that lived experience at the table gives a different perspective to the team. It helps them see why or why not the families. Yeah, I think it's definitely, there's definitely an added benefit to having someone with lived experience at the table. And that's definitely something in the way that we're structuring it that we're not providing that in my program. And I see that definitely as like a benefit. And I guess in the way that we've structured it in alignment with the IPS model, we feel like putting the emphasis on the relationship is more important than that shifting culture or team culture or offering that perspective, because we really want the young person to be there when I'm talking about them or learning about them. So, but it's definitely, there's definitely value in that. It sounds, from what Michael has shared, there's been some really significant, awesome changes from having him in the room. And yeah, so there's definitely value in that. I don't know, Michael, if you want to say more to that.
I think you said it really well. One question that came through is, how do you get introduced to participants?
I usually meet people within the first week or two of starting the program. Back when we were in person before COVID-19, I would usually meet people at the end of their intake or meet them right before, one of their first appointments. And now that we are doing everything remotely, I usually just reach out to them via email or phone or text, or I might join part of somebody's session on Zoom. Or we actually also have a scheduled time for me and the employment education specialist and our care and case manager to meet incoming young people as well. So we try to get everybody connected as soon as possible. I guess it sort of varies person by person. Did you want to add to that, Michael?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I tried to talk a little bit about it earlier, but I'll give a full picture of what it used to look like compared to what it is now. So in the past, I would get introduced to participants. We would have the therapist would be the treatment plan holder, and then they would identify the services that person might be good for that person to work with, and then connect me as a peer support to that person. And some challenges that I saw with that is that the therapist was, already doing the work that they were doing with that participant. So it was hard for them to go outside of that and then try and connect someone else. And it didn't give me a chance to speak on my behalf about the services the peer support services that I provided, and really have that kind of intro conversation with that person. And we've since changed it so that we have a welcome to the team night, so that each person gets to come in and chat with each service. So I would have a direct conversation with that person, and they would get to make a choice that night if they wanted to meet with peer support or not. And then, what suggestions do you have for an older peer support specialist in connecting to youth? I think one thing that I would say, because I also meet with folks who are 12, 13, 14 years old, and that's a pretty significant age gap. And what I found is that if I just treat people like people, and just really stick to like that peer support approach, that it really doesn't make a difference. And it's all about that shared experience and finding ways to strategically connect with folks. What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, I think that's a tricky question. I agree with that. I also think it can be fun to try and look into what things are trending or what sort of forms of communication people are into, and sort of like do a little research on that so that it's a little easier to pick up on cues or to like sort of know where to start conversations. I'm not very good at this, but I think that's like could be a fun thing to keep in mind. But yeah, I really like what Michael said. The next question is, do you automatically meet everyone? Yes, within the first 3 weeks at the latest, usually within the first week, I do meet everybody, and then it's sort of their choice as to how they want to continue to meet or not meet. But the expectation is that I will be connected with everybody starting the program.
Also, yes. And unless a person identifies that they don't want to, they kind of have the power to choose to meet with me or not. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I guess maybe I should clarify that, of course, people can always say no. And the intention is to at least have an introduction to everybody. But if somebody's overwhelmed or they're just not ready, like I might not meet them for a little while, and then it's entirely voluntary how long they would like to like meet me one-on-one or join groups. Yeah, any other questions?
Hi guys, can you guys talk about the role of peer support in leadership and participatory decision making?
Ooh, that's a good question. When you say in leadership, can you expand a little bit more on that for me, please?
Well, you were talking about a young adult leadership council. So what kind of role do you play, and why is that important? How is that different than other things you might do?
What more clarifying question? Sorry. What role do I play in the leadership council?
Exactly. I mean, I think it's something a lot of places don't have at all. Like they don't have a leadership council. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what a leadership council is and what role you play in it.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And thanks for the clarifying information there. As the facilitator, I guess I see myself more as a liaison from the leadership council to the team and the state. The leadership council kind of sets and identifies their own goals, and I try to support them through connecting to the team and anywhere else where they might need to be connected to kind of make that happen. Unfortunately, not all identified goals are able to be able, sometimes there are policies or things in place that make it challenging to reach a specific goal, but we try really hard to support folks to set those goals and work towards them in the leadership council and accomplish them. And yeah, I hope that answers your question, Tamara.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I also see another question on boundaries there. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. How do you discuss and approach boundaries with participants you serve? Well, one thing I would like to note is that I tend not to use the word client. I use participants, folks. I've had conversations before with folks, and it really resonated with me that sometimes the word client has like a negative kind of stigma around it, just from traditional mental health services. And so I just try to stay up, not use that specific word. I'll let you answer the question first, Sarah.
I echo that as well. I think language is really important, especially as we're providing such a different type of relationship. I think being really thoughtful around what language we use is something I definitely spend a fair amount of energy on. The question of how you approach boundaries with the clients you serve, or with, I also often use participants or young people. I think this is a really tricky one. I try to just be as transparent of, when I'm available, and, letting people know about mandated reporting, ahead of time, if possible, and kind of as things come up, addressing things as they come up. But I think this is definitely something that I feel like I could learn more from other people, and continue to sort of improve as I do this work. I don't know, Michael, do you have some things that you usually keep in mind with this?
Yeah, I think that's a good question about boundaries and discussing them. I think as a peer support, we connect pretty intimately with people and really have to maintain that professional boundary. And, that goes to what happens if I see someone in public outside of the office, outside of, the business hours, and making sure that they understand the kind of professional relationship that we have and how that's different from a friend that they might have. Also, the mandatory, that I am a mandatory reporter, and things that if they share certain things with me, I then have to share that with other people. And I also try to talk about conversations I have with other team members, just to let them know and be as informed as they can about that information that I might share with other people as well. It's tough, and especially when I first started trying to navigate and understand that, the peer support training here was a 2-week, 80-hour. It was 1 week, 40 hours. Yeah, 1 week, 40 hours. I think something along that line. And then I was thrown into the world of peer support, and it was such a steep learning curve from there that all of these things were not easy to comprehend at first.
Any other questions from anybody? I think we have 15 more minutes. You're welcome to those of you that said thank you. I'm glad you found it helpful.
And thanks to all of you for being here today and being a part of this conversation.
Yeah, let me ask you, let me throw another question out at you. So what kind of training do you think peer support specialists need beyond what is being available to folks at this stage?
I know in my experience, I received a brief introduction to everything a peer support might need to know. And it was all crammed together in 40 hours over a week of time. And so I think, in my opinion, I could have benefited from continued training on everything. But one thing I haven't had a lot of continued training on is specifically about just the peer support role. And, so just even more peer support related direct training would be nice.
I think we're lucky in Maine that we have continuing educations and co-reflections where we talk with other peer support specialists throughout the year. So there's definitely a fair amount of training opportunities. I think for myself, I am excited at the possibility, which I think will probably happen within the next few months, of getting some more youth-specific training around advocacy, especially. I think I have more to learn in terms of like how to best work with the younger age group, because that's not something that's specifically covered in intentional peer support. That training is really more geared towards adults. So that's definitely something I'm excited to get more resources and more training in. And I agree with Michael. I feel like there is always room for learning and growth, and it's great to get information the second time. I don't know if there's like something particular. I feel like all of it is helpful to continue getting training. So there's another question here about gender differences, especially with participants who may have a history of trauma. Have you had any challenges connecting due to gender differences? I don't know if I'm totally understanding that question, but I would say that it's a little bit harder, I think, as like, for me, let me rephrase that. I guess for me, like the younger adolescent boys tend to seem to be like less interested in connecting, and I don't know if like that's just like that age range in general is not really interested in talking about stuff, or if that has to do with being a young woman. I don't know, but that maybe is a barrier for me. I'm not sure if that's answering your question though.
For myself, I think that I definitely have had experiences where just because of gender differences, it was a challenge to connect with them. One person I can think of, experienced postpartum psychosis. And so that was something that I really couldn't connect with in that shared experience. And, I think just definitely there have been gender differences that made it so I couldn't connect or made it more challenging.
I think this is where Michael spoke to having multiple peer supports, not only for, different life experiences or different perspectives, but also different genders, just to have more and other like diversity as well, just to have like more people that might connect with young people in different ways. Because I think there's always going to be, we're not going to be able to connect with everybody. So I think that's definitely a good argument for having more than one peer support specialist.
Another question here is, has it been hard to pull youth into virtual groups while dealing with COVID? If not, what has been the best way to connect with them since so much was shut down? One thing that I think has been a barrier so much isn't necessarily connecting participants into groups, but more so systematically the things that we've had to do to change policies to be able to offer groups to participants virtually has been a challenge. I've found that just connecting in like one-on-one, some people are more comfortable being in their own home, talking on the phone or over video. But it definitely has, just created more isolation for folks. And so I found that sometimes where I would meet with someone once a week, we would be meeting twice a week instead.
I've definitely found that my typical activity groups, one of the groups has fewer attendees now that we're virtual on Zoom. The other one seems to have maintained like similar numbers. So I think it varies. I find Zoom very draining, and I think many people are not comfortable with it. So there's definitely barriers. And yeah, definitely barriers in that can be challenging.
Again, thank you all for being here and listening to our talk today. I've appreciated the conversation that we've been able to have through the questions as well.
Yes, thank you everybody so much for coming, and both of our contact info is on the screen, and feel free to reach out. I would love to continue the conversation. Yeah, and thanks for all the questions.
Thank you guys so much. If there are other questions that come up, we can always follow up by email. There's fortunately a lot of conversation going on about peer support right now. Within EASA, we will be putting together our own fidelity guidelines. So hopefully you guys can help us write those. And also, I just want to point out that On Track New York has developed a really nice manual and materials for other team members that folks might be interested in. But it isn't quite the IPS model. So, depending on how you approach it, it can look differently. So you guys are awesome. Lots of thanks and congratulations in the chat box. And any last comments or thoughts before we head out?
Thanks, everybody. Take care of yourself.
I think it's just awesome to see much excitement about peer support and to continue to see the growth of the field.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, guys. So talk to you again soon. Take care, everybody.